is going to completely ignore it. That's what happened when I said we have opened a matter. They all reported the FBI has an investigation open.
Robbie Mook is with me live, former campaign manager for Hillary Clinton. Robbie Mook, it's good to see you again. Want to, of course, get your thoughts on the big testimony today, but specifically first honing in on what Director Comey just said about what the Attorney General was instructing him to do, using the word matter over investigation. That was essentially the language that, your campaign was using. Do you think it was appropriate for Loretta Lynch to be asking Director Comey to essentially downplay the word and say matter instead of investigation?
Well, I don't obviously know what transpired between the two of them. We'll just have to take the director's commentary on that. And our campaign wasn't talking to anybody in the Justice Department. We were going off what was being said publicly. I would say overall in this entire matter, it's important that we learn the facts about what happened in the past, but it's also important that we fix what didn't work in the future. And I think to get into that small anecdote that he told, I think we're losing the broader picture here, which was we had breakdowns across.
I don't want to lose the broader picture, but forgive me, Robbie, but if we do take, the former FBI director at his word, and that this is what Loretta Lynch told him to do, can you just weigh in for me on what he said this morning?
It's hard for me to do so because I don't know the facts of the matter.
If she did that, Robbie, if she did, would that be appropriate?
I just don't know because I'm not an expert on the Justice Department. I don't know what its status was at that time. What I do know, and again, I'm stepping back into the bigger picture because that's all I know and understand as your viewers do, as somebody who's not privileged to the classified information here. There were two investigations going on. One was into now President Trump and the relationship that his campaign might have had with Russia, and another was into Secretary Clinton's emails. And the director made a choice to talk about just one of those matters. And that was, I would argue at this point, misleading to the public. We saw the New York Times put out a piece very close to Election Day saying that based on their conversations with the FBI, there was very little evidence at all that there was any sort of relationship with Russia. And lo and behold, after the election, nothing could be farther from the truth. And so again, to me, what matters is what do we do moving forward? And I wish that more time had been spent today
before we move forward, and I'm not going to belabor this, but just so I'm clear, your campaign and DOJ never communicated over language to be used.
Not at all. Not at all. I didn't know anybody in the Justice Department. And again, I think this is a shiny object when the real question here is how should these matters be handled? And why did the director talk about one investigation and remain completely silent on another? And I think this anecdote that he told makes it easy to ignore that fact. Not to mention, obviously, there's bigger issues here about whether, in fact, there was coordination with the Russians by the Trump campaign, and certainly whether there's subsequently been obstruction of justice by the Trump administration as the FBI begins to investigate the matter.
As that is something, it sounds like just talking to some our legal folks here, it sounds like now the inquiry into the investigation, start of the investigation into potential obstruction of justice will begin. And let me just, before I let you go, on the testimony overall today, I mean, listen, I've read a lot of what you've said on Director Comey. Safe to say, you're not a huge fan. I think that, in your discussions, what he's done, border, illegal. What did you make of what he discussed this morning?
Well, look, I'll start with something positive. I thought he made a very important point, which is that the Russian intervention in the election was unprecedented. This cannot be seen as a partisan issue. It's going to happen to the Republicans at some point, too. And other countries are going to begin to play ball. We had a proof of concept by the Russians. We should expect others to come in. I thought that was really positive. I was astounded, as I'm sure others were, that the president did seem to intervene to try to diminish or stop this investigation in some way. I think, as your other guests were saying earlier, we're left almost with more questions than answers. And I hope we get to the bottom of this, and I hope that Republicans on the Hill realize this isn't going to get better by trying to make it go away. Just need to learn the truth and then look at the future and ask ourselves, how can the justice system, how can the media, social media, our political process all collaborate better to resist this kind of intervention from happening again? And how can we get our democracy functioning better? Being more partisan will only make for more cover-ups, more secrets, and potentially more obstruction of justice.
Ravi Mook, thank you so much. Former campaign manager for Hillary Clinton, and from the Clinton campaign to the Trump campaign. Jason Miller's just been seated. You were listening to my conversation there. What do you think? What do you think of the points he was making?
Well, I think
first on Loretta Lynch.
I think the Loretta Lynch news is, that was a bombshell today. I think the fact that this was just swept under the rug and we're just finding out about this now, but I think this goes to this larger narrative that sometimes things were okay to be political and maybe not brought up at the moment. Sometimes they had to be brought up exactly then. I think, the biggest thing that probably came out today to me was the leaks. I think this leaks issue is very detrimental. And the fact that Director Comey, I think before today, a lot of folks viewed him as a true lawman. They didn't know much about the way he thought or the way he would interpret things. But after today, you can see where they're very, very political thinking that went into this. Specifically leaking a conversation he had with the president to hopefully influence a special counsel. This is from the director of the FBI, and this is remarkable.
Well, I would say that the president has been pretty good at talking about conversations that he had with Director Comey. Doesn't make it necessarily right, but if you are Director Comey and you have just been fired and you feel like you've been pushed into a corner and you have specifically written memos in a way that are not classified so that they can then be discussed, whether that is in the public square or whether that is before a congressional committee, I don't know. I think that Donald Trump can't have it both ways. Comey doesn't make it necessarily right, but if you are Director Comey and you have just been fired and you feel like you've been pushed into a corner and you have specifically written memos in a way that are not classified so that they can then be discussed, whether that is in the public square or whether that is before a congressional committee, I don't know. I think that Donald Trump can't have it both ways. The
leaker, if you want to keep it a name, but just as in the case of a grand jury, when you come out as a grand jury witness and they ask you, what did you say? What was the conversation? You're perfectly permitted to say what you said. She can't say what I said if she was a grand juror, and that is a leak. But in this case, it's not a leak. It is a conversation that he is permitted to have. The manner in which he did it, through a cutout, that we can talk about whether that was desirable or not desirable. But we can't.
Just one question. Kasowitz, the president's outside counsel today, referred to these conversations as privileged.
Privileged conversations.
Privileged conversations.
Well,
is that accurate?
Well, so in the definition of executive privilege under United States versus Nixon, you see that the court was addressing conversations that are related to policy by the inner circle of the president so that they can make informed decisions with respect to that policy. This was not that type of conversation. This was a threat, intimidation, an obstruction. You can label it whatever you want to label it. A chat, or a request. Not, or a request, or a hope.
But
it is not.
Could anyone have
definitionally an exhibit?
Could anyone off the street have obtained this memo?
Could anyone off the street have obtained this memo? I don't know.
So you see, that's the point. Is that not a leak then? If it's something,
it's not a leak. It's not an official document. Look, he was the FBI director. He came back. He had a very weird conversation with the president that he felt that he needed to put down on paper. These are his personal recollections. They weren't, a part of an investigation, which we now know. And he's entitled to put down
the fact that he did it on a classified laptop and
he did one of them on a laptop. But he made sure that the content of it was not classified. They are his own impressions of what took place. And I think that Had he put this down in a memoir after he was fired, or had written it down in his personal diary and handed it over to the New York Times, no one would be, I mean, just because he's calling it a memo.
But then why wouldn't he have just emailed it out or posted it on Facebook? Why did he go and give it to a friend?
Well, he didn't have a good answer for that.
He didn't have a good answer for that. He didn't have a good answer for that.
Red herrings for
That would have
for the real focus of this, which is the completely unacceptable and inappropriate behavior of the president. You know, we can spin this and call squirrel to put our attention somewhere else, but let's not forget.
If he found, hang on just a second, if he found the behavior, the demands or the questions of the president inappropriate, I really don't know if he had a great answer today, David Priest, on, okay, alarm bells ringing, right? Why not say something to someone? Go to Congress. Did he have a solid answer today?
This happens all the time. As a former intelligence officer, I used to brief the Attorney General, the FBI Director, every day on the President's daily brief. I used to brief in the White House. There are awkward conversations. There are difficult conversations where the truth versus loyalty dilemma comes up. I'm giving the truth as I see it, and the policymaker in these cases doesn't like the message I'm giving. In the Comey case, it was about what he was saying about the investigation and his unwillingness to say, yes, sir, I am personally loyal to you. Well, what happens when you have that ethical dilemma? You resolve it one way or the other. It's tough for any of us to put ourselves in those shoes, and we should be very slow to judge somebody else who is put in that position. But I was put in that position many times, which is, do I call it like I see it? And if there's some pushback, do I then go to the press? Do I then write a memo for the record? Or do I push back to the policymaker in this case, or in his case, the President of the United States, and say, sir, what you are doing is inappropriate? Now, the difference is, when I was briefing intelligence information, we were there to help the policymakers do a difficult job. In his case, he was telling the president something that actually affected the investigation. What he said this morning was, I did not want to call foul, throw the red flag, and say, Mr. President, this is inappropriate, because then that affects the investigation.
He was worried the red flag would affect the investigation.
And you know what? The other thing is that the Sally Yates conversation is instructive on what he did here. When he felt that the Justice Department was compromised back in the Clinton email scandal, what did he do? He held a press conference, effectively, to let that story be known. Here, when he felt that the Attorney General and Deputy Attorney General were similarly compromised and that they were not likely to investigate a matter which he felt was worthy of investigation, he went to the press.
You mentioned the AG.
Let's listen
to what Director Comey said today specifically about Jeff Sessions.
In your statement, you said that you and the FBI leadership team decided not to discuss the president's actions with Attorney General Sessions, even though he had not recused himself. What was it about the Attorney General's own interaction with the Russians or his behavior with regard to the investigation that would have led the entire leadership of the FBI to make this decision?
Our judgment, as I recall, was that he was very close to and inevitably going to recuse himself for a variety of reasons. We also were aware of facts that I can't discuss in an open setting that would make his continued engagement in a Russia-related investigation problematic. So we were convinced, and in fact, I think we'd already heard that the career people were recommending that he recuse himself, that he was not going to be in contact with Russia-related matters much longer.
April Ryan, it's the piece of that where he says, I can't discuss in an open setting, which when my ears perked, so I thought, my goodness, okay, so what else do we not know about the Attorney General that he can't discuss unless it's a classified setting?
Well, it sounds like there's an investigation. Something's going on. It sounds like he could not trust when he was talking there to give the information to those people at the time because all eyes are looking. And there is something going on behind the scenes that we don't know. But you have to remember also at that time, they had information prior to us finding out about Jeff Sessions recusing himself. Jeff Sessions is tainted. As the Attorney General, he is tainted. So as an FBI director, you're like, where do I go? Where do I go? You're in this quagmire. The checks and balances were off. They're skewed 100 and some days into this process, this experiment of Donald J. Trump as president. And the question is, who do you trust? I mean, do I go to my boss and say this, and he's in the midst of this investigation? How do I go up against the president? I mean, and I'm not trying to trivialize it, but when you are standing in front of the president of the United States, and he says something to you, it's like, whoa, this is the highest office in the land. I mean, I remember the president asked me in February,